It's a terrible show. It's awful. It's poorly written. The characters are uninteresting. With all due respect, Paul, and I say this as politely as I can, please, for the love of God, call a plumber and get help having your head removed from your...
Renegade Online.
You saw a lot of us out there discussing the article from Eric Kane that came out a few hours after the debut of the Acolyte Episode 3. Well, now we get this gem, which is, let's call it a rebuttal from Paul Tassi, a rebuttal against common sense and sensibility, a rebuttal against evidence and facts. Objective issues like this show is bad and this show is written poorly. I don't know how else to argue it at that point. At least that's my opinion, right? But Paul Tassi, unlike Eric Kane, he's got a very different opinion. And God bless him, he's entitled to his opinion, but let's see what Paul had to say today. The 15% audience score of Star Wars The Acolyte is embarrassing for the fans, for the audience scorers. Meaning that those of you that went out there and gave your honest opinion about this new Star Wars dog squeeze, you should be ashamed of yourselves for expressing your opinion. While Star Wars has had many controversies in the Disney era, viewers have now mobilized a fleet of TIE bombers to obliterate user scores of The Acolyte wherever possible, namely on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. I previously reported that this started up right at release. The Acolyte quickly became the lowest audience-rated Star Wars project besides the infamous holiday special. Now its former 33% score has dipped below. That's the Acolyte's 33% score, which is where it started at week 1. Remember, episodes 1 and 2. That was all that was out at that point. Keep that in mind. Its former 33% score following the release of episodes 1 and 2 has now dipped below the holiday special's 20% score, and it's all the way down to 15, which we showed you earlier. Now, a couple of things that I want to address on that one very quickly. I'm not a big fan, and I never have been a big fan, of comparing RT scores for current programming, be it film or television, streaming, whatever, to movies and television shows that were out long before RT was even a thought. It's a very different dynamic when your sample size, the demographics, the people coming in that are actually voting on this, are voting in reaction to a brand new property they just saw. What did you think of it? Good or bad? Rated on a scale of 1 to 10 versus a piece of property that came out 40 years ago, in this case, with the holiday special. People could have voted on that. How long has Rotten Tomatoes been around? Really, in its current form, as popular as it is, maybe 10 years. I know it's been around longer than that, but think about the number of people that went on and voted and used Rotten Tomatoes 15 years ago. 20 years ago, it was basically a non-entity. It's a very, very different thing when people are randomly going in over time. Oh, yeah, the holiday special, man. I remember seeing that here. I'll vote for it while I'm here. Versus something that's brand new. I'm not saying that you can't compare it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't compare things like that on Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb for that matter. What I am saying is when you do comparisons on things like that, you know, like for example, Paul Tassi the week before. Wait, I think I still have it actually pulled up. Let's look at this. Is the previous article from Paul Tassi last week. The Acolyte has the lowest Star Wars audience scores since the holiday special. And they go down here to see this. Now, look, you want to see? Here's the list. Empire Strikes Back had the highest audience score, followed by OG 1977 Star Wars, Return of the Jedi at 94%, Clone Wars at 91, Rogue One at 87, Rise of Skywalker 86, Andor, Force Awakens. Okay. The first 3 Star Wars movies, everybody loved these things, right? And that's kind of a one-off. When we go down and we look at things like this, where we see The Last Jedi, 41% audience, 91% critics, right? Acolyte falling under that. Holiday special, 20%. How many people went and voted on the actual holiday specials? That's been a joke for years. Again, is it perfect? No. Can we always use it as a scoring metric? Like if we say, well, people didn't like the original Mad Max as much as this one, or this one did better than this one. Well, this was a movie that came out 30, 40 years ago. Is it really fair to compare votes scattered over 5 or 10 years of it being on IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes versus all the scores loading up in instant reaction to something that's brand new? Not a big fan of it. But that being said, let's go back over here to this article with that in mind. At a certain point, this is just absurd, Paul Tassi says, about the 15% score for the Acolyte. And it says a lot more about the viewers than it does the quality of the show itself, which has barely even gotten started, now just 3 episodes in. Let me stop you right there with all due respect, Paul. This is a television show. The first episode has basically the same responsibility as any other television show. Get the audience hooked. If it doesn't do that, if it doesn't hook the audience in, it doesn't matter how well the rest of the show goes because nobody's watching it. It has one job, get the audience. I don't know where this idea began that everybody should sit there and watch bad television week after week after week thinking that, oh, maybe 7 or 8 episodes from now, things might get explained and everything gets a lot better, even though I'm thoroughly miserable watching the first 2 episodes of this show. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely stupid. No, I'm not going to entertain a debate that this is not review bombing. A 15% score is barely more than a third of the last and most controversial Disney Star Wars project, The Last Jedi. Nothing is even close except that holiday special on IMDb. It's even easier to see. A full 54% of all reviews are 1 star, giving it a 3.6 out of 10. So, what exactly is the review bombing part, Paul? Is it that people are reviewing it badly because it's a bad show? Or is it because they're giving it 1 star instead of 4? What do you want people to do? Please define review bombing for me. I really want to know. Isn't review bombing also, like we talked about this before, it works in the opposite direction, does it not? Does it not also work as review bombing when you have critics artificially run the score up of a television show like The Acolyte initially into the mid-90s, certified fresh? When, people started watching this show and busting out in laughter, and that's if they didn't fall asleep on the sofa watching it like I did. It's a terrible show. It's awful. It's poorly written. The characters are uninteresting. With all due respect, Paul, and I say this as politely as I can, please, for the love of God, call a plumber and get help having your head removed from your ass. Please. There's also how fast this happened, Paul says. For instance, Ahsoka has only gotten 5,000 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes after being out for months, while The Acolyte has aired 3 episodes in 2 weeks and has 10,000 reviews in. The last season of The Mandalorian only has 2,500 reviews in. The beloved Andor, well, to some, it might have been beloved, 5,000 reviews total years later. Okay, let's talk about this. I think that's a valid point to bring up, but we have to put it in context. First of all, Ahsoka was a show that, frankly, a lot of people didn't care about. The show was mid at best. It wasn't horrible. It was closer to horrible than great, but it wasn't great either. It was just there. I felt like Ahsoka left a lot on the table. I think the action sequences were largely phoned in. It was just not that enjoyable to watch. It was a boring show. You see, the point is that Ahsoka didn't really get the audience ginned up one way or the other to really go vote a lot for it. You didn't have a lot of excitement on Ahsoka that it was so great that people wanted to go out there and rank it up. And it wasn't so atrocious that people wanted to go out there and just absolutely dunk on it. But the key is that either way, in the case of Ahsoka and in the case of The Acolyte, we are talking about still people that have actually seen the show. So I think if you've seen the show, I don't think it's fair to call it review bombing. But they also bring up things like The Mandalorian and whatnot. And again, RT then versus RT now. I mean, The Mandalorian, the last season, that was 4 years ago now. Almost 5. I think that was the end of 2020. So almost 4 years ago now. Here's the difference. I think you more correctly compare this to The Last Jedi. Because The Last Jedi was a slap in the face to Star Wars fans. It was a slap in the face to sane audiences out there. The Acolyte is the same thing. My opinion. I think the opinion of a lot of people out there. But The Acolyte was a slap in the face. If you give people enough reason to get so pissed off, or to have them laugh so hard in this case, or is to leave them scratching their heads so hard that they're ripping hair out, as to what the hell they just watched, and what in the hell has Disney done to my beloved Star Wars franchise, then you're going to elicit a much stronger reaction to this. You're going to get a much stronger reaction. And I think that's what happened here. I think that's what's going on here. Now, again, if you can find evidence that you've got a handful of people running bot farms out there that have contributed a few thousand reviews in the one, I went and I rated this show as a 1. I voted on IMDb and I voted on Rotten Tomatoes, which I almost never do. But my reaction to this show was so strong. And I did it after the 3rd episode of The Acolyte. Or I did it for that episode, but I also did it on the show overall. I can't remember which order. But I voted on this, and I voted it a 1, because that's what I felt like it was. I'm like, this is a virtually no effort. And I think I even made a joke in there and on IMDb in my review that said, I gave it 1 star because I think they at least figured out how to turn on the camera. I thought that was fair. Y'all want to let me know in the chat if it wasn't. Rotten Tomatoes has previously tried to curb review bombing in the wake of what happened with Captain Marvel's release. Now, this is back from 2019. Quote, verifying people had watched the movie before reviewing, and that's because Rotten Tomatoes is owned by Fandango. So if you log into your Fandango account and connect it to your Rotten Tomatoes account, and you buy your movie tickets, for example, through Fandango, it's instant verification. Hey, we know you've seen this movie because you bought a ticket through us for this movie that rolled at this time. So that's how they do it. Now, you can link other movie accounts to it if you're buying tickets elsewhere. I think there's a way to do it. But that being said, that's how they do this. But they wanted to verify people had watched the movie before reviewing. Fair enough. But there has been no way to enforce such a system with television, so here we are. Well, they don't allow public reviews until after an episode or a TV show actually releases, right? They have that much that they can do. But what's the suggestion here? Are we just supposed to rely on professional critics' reviews to tell us what to watch and what's good? Because quite honest, Paul, people like you are far more often wrong than you are right. I hate to say it. That's just my opinion in terms of what I watch, and I know what a lot of people like me watch, and there's a lot of people like me out there. Why is this happening? There's a bunch of dimensions to this, and none of them are good. There's absolutely a racial and gender component to this. Oh, no! Oh, my God, no. Really, why? Why? Is it because Disney has positioned this show since day one as the most diverse and representative Star Wars ever? Like that matters at all? Well, you know, when all of your marketing around a show is, and especially a Star Wars show, is about how LGBTQ representation or how much of that is in the show, or as Leslie Headland loves to talk about in every single interview, is how queer she is and how queer she grew up and how she puts queerness, these are her words, puts her queerness into every project that she has. And we have Kathleen Kennedy out there still doing interviews with places like the New York Times, telling us how the demographic of Star Wars' fan base is still older white men. And she acknowledges this, but also in the same breath indicates that that's problematic for her and her girls at Lucasfilm. You know what? I'm not taking the rap for this. We just want good Star Wars. I don't care who's in it. Again, people like me were very interested to see where, like, John Boyega's character was going in the sequel trilogy. Okay, we have a Jedi that might come out of a stormtrooper. But then Disney threw him in the back and pretty much canned his character, turned him into comedic relief. We all know how that turned out. Not well. So stop blaming me for your own problems. I'm sorry that the people who run Star Wars and people like Paul Tassi don't seem to understand the problems with a show like this, because they didn't do this with Inside Out 2, did they? No, they hit their target audience. Star Wars has been owned by Disney now for 12 years, and they have yet to even attempt, outside of The Mandalorian, give them credit for that, they have yet to even attempt. By the way, the guy who played Mando isn't white. They have yet to even attempt to go after the actual fan base of Star Wars, which is white, black, Hispanic, Asian, male, female. It's everybody. But you keep wanting to eliminate the single largest demographic that is in the Star Wars fan base. And you wonder why this is going to happen. And you keep insulting us. That's the worst part. But a clip from star Amanda Stenberg about making white people cry was shared tens of thousands of times online, taken out of context from an interview years earlier about her film, The Hate You Give. And I remember the clip. We played it. I understand the context of it, and I think we brought that up during the show. The idea with playing that clip is that it fit so well into everything else that Amanda Stenberg has talked about, as well as Leslie Headland and Kathleen Kennedy and so many other people at the Lucasfilm Story Group over the years, about getting rid of certain members of their problematic Star Wars fan base that they paid $4 billion to get. Showrunner Leslie Headland has stated in many YouTube, or starred in many YouTube thumbnails, lambasting the, quote, woke nature of the series, but it also is allegedly breaking canon, quote unquote. This is the main reason for the surge since episode 3 aired. We're getting to the crux of it. He's finally maybe figuring this out. See, episode 3 was the real problem. People didn't care that much after the first 2 episodes. It was just poorly written, poorly executed, boring drivel that didn't even look anything like Star Wars. It just had people that had Jedi attire on and some lightsabers. But that was about it. That's about where the Star Wars portion of things ended. But episode 3 actually just pissed people off because it was so silly. And especially because how do you spend $200 million making... How do you spend $200 million making this? I'm sorry. Let's just go ahead and enjoy this one more time.
The power of one. The power of two. The power of...
Yeah, okay. When you want to sit there and tell me that you can't believe people reacted poorly to a bunch of lesbian fan fiction, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I genuinely don't. And again, this is Leslie Headland and her whole crew telling us this for the last year and a half about what this show was going to be. The main reason for the surge since episode 3 aired, where fans, quote unquote, believe the show has broken canon or destroyed the lore of Anakin Skywalker by implying that, like Anakin, the twins are a virgin Force birth. Anakin was conceived purely through the Force alone, part of his, quote, chosen one mythology, and now they say that that's happened again, ruining everything. The problem is we simply have no idea if that's true, even if that's what everyone is assuming after last week. Didn't they say this in the episode? I carried them. I created them. I don't know what we're missing here, Paul. Specifically, while they say the girls, quote, have no father, it's implied that their mother did something unnatural to create them, which would not be a spontaneous Force baby situation. Dark side, meddling, witch magic, cloning, we simply don't know yet, but he goes on and on and on and on. There's also the pushback about the portrayal of the Jedi is not great, acting as space cops, rounding up Force-sensitive kids to test and train, not by abducting them per se, but, you know, luring them away from their families for their own good, so on and so forth. The 15% score is embarrassing. Let's get to, Paul's big complaint here. The 15% score is embarrassing, not for the show, but for those review bombing it to a frankly laughable degree. I'm not even the Acolyte's biggest fan, Oh, but you are a fan, Paul. You're one of the few. All right, congratulations. Look, Paul, if you like the show, if this show speaks to you, then good on you, man. That's fine. You like the show, that's cool. I'm not going to begrudge you for liking the show. I think the show's crap. The vast majority of Star Wars fans and the rest of the world think the show's crap. I know there's some people out there that like it, but there don't seem to be a whole lot of you. I mean, this isn't just Book of Boba Fett cringe bad. This is like beyond that. There's been some bad stuff, but this is absolutely terrible. But I digress. I'm not even the Acolyte's biggest fan, says Paul Tassi, as the first two episodes I didn't love, though I thought episode 3 was more interesting. I would love to know what was so interesting about it. But the worst Star Wars project by an order of magnitude in the history of this series, it just so happens to be here we go. And it just so happens to be one mostly starring black women. This whole situation is a parody of the modern toxic fan base of the series. And if you want to disguise it as being upset about canon, then it shows a distinct lack of understanding, or he says, understand of both the material of the show and the wider universe. You can critique a show, sure, but overwhelmingly, that's just not what's happening here, and it goes well beyond that. While we have seen many things like this happen with Star Wars fandom over the years, I can't help but feel like it's absolutely getting worse. Paul, sorry, you're just wrong. This idea, okay, that it's mostly starring black women, let's take that for a minute. I could care less. You know what should be insulting? This should be insulting to the black women starring in the show. The show should probably be insulting to black women fans of Star Wars, because the black women that star in this show were handed one of the cheesiest, worst pieces of garbage I've ever seen. Something that doesn't look remotely like Star Wars, and this is what they were asked to perform. God bless them for having to put up with this. I'm not going to sit here and personally blame Jodie Turner-Smith. I'm not personally blaming Amanda Stenberg. I can take some task, or I can take some issue with her, take her to task for maybe some of the stupid comments that she makes. But I don't blame her for how this show was written, because she didn't write it. Neither did Jodie Turner-Smith. Neither did Carrie-Anne Moss, for that matter, or anybody else in this show. The problem, Paul, that you don't seem to understand is that this show was billed from the get-go, not as being a Star Wars show. And go back and look it up if you don't believe me. But this show from the very beginning was constantly discussed as it's going to be the most diverse and representative Star Wars, yada, yada, yada. We didn't care, and by that point, we were so sick and tired of hearing about this. Just make a good show. Just make a damn show that doesn't suck. They can't do that. And guess what? All of these minority actors and people that are in this show, Paul, that you're so sorry for at this point, they're the ones who got screwed, not by us, the fans, but by the Walt Disney Company, Kathleen Kennedy, Disney Lucasfilm, Leslie Headland, and all them. That's the fact. This is going to continue to happen with Star Wars as time goes on, because the people running Star Wars don't care about Star Wars. Kathleen Kennedy has never cared about Star Wars. She doesn't know anything about Star Wars, and from day one, she wanted to turn Star Wars into a female-centered brand. And then we wonder where all the fans went, and you wonder why the fans are constantly ragging on this absolute, pardon my French, dog shit that they keep producing. And that's what it is. Now, it's funny because at the same magazine, one of your colleagues out there, and I'm not trying to pitch y'all against one another, don't misunderstand me, but you've got Eric Kane out there that had a very different opinion than you did, writing in the same magazine at Forbes. So it'll be interesting. Maybe y'all two should talk, have it out in an article together. I would love to see it. But this notion, Paul, that we are somehow review bombing and we're creating all the problems for this show, when this show has created all the problems on its own. And if you want to actually, again, if you want to see what I'm talking about, the same Star Wars fans that you're calling racist right now, bigoted, misogynistic, or whatever the hell else. When I finish this show tonight, I'm going to watch House of the Dragon. Let me tell you the list of all the damns I gave when the Valerians turned out to be black in season 1. Exactly 0 damns. I don't care. You know why? Because House of the Dragon is a damn fine show. Written well, acted superbly, well directed, visually stunning, and it's captivating. I realize not everybody likes it, and I realize people take issue with it because they're big House of the Dragon book fans. I never really read the books, so I'm going in blind, and I'm really enjoying the show, and it's extremely well done. And it's a show whose numbers are absolutely going to smoke The Acolyte. In fact, Disney's only show that they have on Disney Plus that even comes close to competing with House of the Dragon is Bluey, and they don't even make that one.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.